Okay. Jeez. All right, we're back online. Are we up? Are we live? Okay. Okay. Well, to those of you who were here before, and hopefully are back again. Live, unstable, is it still? Oh, okay. There we go. We're back online. Hooray. Hooray. That was quite something. All right. Yep, I sure was offline because someone. Here, you get out from there. You get out from there. Where's the toy I gave you? Someone whose name shall not be named here, Potato, decided to chew through my my network cable. So so I'm on wireless now, so hopefully with the Wi-Fi going we should still be okay. That's fine. You chew your toy there. Yeah. Monsieur Patate. Monsieur Pomme de Terre. Excuse you. Get out of there. You can? Okay, that's good. Did you chew this off too? We'll be right back. Potato? Yep, take that. Good. This is good. Right? Good. Come on. Okie dokie. Okay. All right. So, in apparent rebellion to me not paying all of my attention to him, a certain someone who shall go unnamed decided that he would chew through my network cable. So, that was fun. Oh, man. So, we're starting a little late, but we are 3 chapters from the end. So, I'm kind of curious to see how my voice is doing. If it's doing all right, we might actually push to the end of the book. So, Zephyr, are you still there? If you are there, can you please drop a message just so I can verify? Okay, cool. Okay. Okay, all right, Twitch was just being a little silly with its thing. Okay. Just wanted to make sure you're still there. All right. So, I apologize. Dog has been locked downstairs. And it's his own fault. So, we shall continue. Chapter 17. The Clouds Burst. The next day, the trumpets rang early in the camp. Soon a single runner was seen hurrying along the narrow path. At a distance, he stood and hailed them, asking whether Thorin would now listen to another embassy, since new tidings had come to hand, and matters were changed. "That will be Dane," said Thorin when he heard. "They will have got wind of his coming. I thought that would alter their mood. Bid them come few in number and weaponless, and I will hear," he called the messenger. About midday, the banners of the forest and the lake were seen to be borne forth again. A company of 20 was approaching. At the beginning of the narrow way, they laid aside their sword and spear and came towards the gate. Wondering, the dwarves saw that among them were both Bard and the Elven King, before whom an old man, wrapped in a cloak and hood, bore a strong casket of iron-bound wood. "Hail, Thorin," said Bard. "Are you still of the same mind?" "My mind does not change with the rising setting of a few suns," answered Thorin. "Did you come to ask me idle questions? Still, the elf host has not departed as I bade. Till then, you can come in vain to bargain with me." "Is there nothing for which you would yield any of your gold? Nothing that you and your friends have to offer?" "What of the Arkenstone of Thrain?" said he, and at that moment the old man opened the casket and held aloft the jewel. The light leapt from his hand, bright and white in the morning. Then Thorin was stricken dumb with amazement and confusion. No one spoke for a long while. Thorin at length broke the silence, and his voice was thick with wrath. "Stone was my father's and is mine," he said. "Why should I purchase my own?" But wonder overcame him, and he added, "But how came you by the heirloom of my house? If there is need to such acts, question of thieves." "We are not thieves," Bard answered. Your own we will give you back in return for our own." "Oh, came you by it?" shouted Thorin in a gathering rage. "I gave it to them," squeaked Bilbo, who was peering over the wall by now in a dreadful fright. You, cried Thorin, turning upon him and grasping him with both hands. "You miserable hobbit, you undersized burglar," he shouted at a loss for words as he shook poor Bilbo like a rabbit. "By the beard of Durin, I wish I had Gandalf here. Curse him for his choice of you. May his beard wither. As for you, I will throw you to the rocks," he said, and lifted Bilbo in his arms. "Stay, your wish is granted," said a voice. The old man with the casket threw aside his hood and cloak. "Here is Gandalf, and none too soon, it seems. If you don't like my burglar, please don't damage him. Put him down and listen first to what he has to say." You all seem in league," said Thorin, dropping Bilbo on top of the wall. "Never again will I have dealing with any wizard or his friends. What have you to say, you descendant of rats?" Dear me," said Bilbo. I'm sure this is all very uncomfortable. You will remember saying that I might choose my own 14th share. Perhaps I took it too literally. I have been told that dwarves are sometimes politer in word than in deed. The time was, all the same, when you seem to think that I had been of some service, descendant of rats and deeds. Is this all the service of you and your family that I was promised, Thorin. Take it that I have disposed of my share as I wished, and let it go at that. I will, said Thorin grimly, and I will let you go at that, and may we never speak again. Then he turned and spoke over the wall. I am betrayed, he said. It was rightly guessed that I could not forbear to redeem the Arkenstone, the treasure of my house. For it, I will give 1/14th share of the hoard in silver and gold, setting aside the gems. But that shall be accounted the promised share of the traitor, and with that reward he shall depart, and you can divide it as you will. He will get little enough, I doubt not. Take him if you wish him to live, and no friendship of mine goes with him. Get down now to your friends, he said to Bilbo, or I will throw you down. What about the gold and silver? Asked Bilbo. That shall follow after, as can be arranged, he said. Get down! Until then, we keep the stone, cried Bard. You are not making a very splendid figure as king under the mountain, said Gandalf, but things may change yet. They may indeed, said Thorin, and already so strong was the bewilderment of the treasure upon him, he was pondering whether by the help of Dane he might not recapture the Arkenstone and withhold his share of the reward. So Bilbo was swung down from the wall and departed with nothing for all his trouble, except the armor which Thorin had given him already. More than one of the dwarves in their hearts felt shame and pity at his going. Farewell, they cried to him. May we meet again as friends. Be off, called Thorin. You have mail upon you which was made by my folks and is too good for you. Cannot be pierced by arrows. But if you not hasten, I will sting your miserable feet. So be swift. Not so hasty, said Bard. We will give you until tomorrow. At noon, we return and see if you have brought from the hoard the portion that is to be set against the stone. If that is done without deceit, then we will depart, and the elf host will go back to the forest. In the meantime, farewell. With that, they went back to the camp. But Thorin sent messengers by Rook, telling Dane of what had passed, and bidding him to come with wary speed. The day passed, and the night. The next day, the wind shifted to the west, and the air was dark and gloomy. The morning was still early when a cry was heard in the camp. Runners came in to report of a host of dwarves had appeared on the eastern spur of the mountains, and was now hastening to Dale. Dane had come. He had hurried through the night, and so had come upon them sooner than they expected. Each one of his folks was clad with a hauberk of steel mail that hung to his knees. His legs were covered with hose of fine and flexible metal mesh, the secret of whose making was possessed by Dane's people. The dwarves are exceedingly strong for their height, but most of these were strong even for dwarves. In battle, they wielded heavy two-handed mattocks, but each of them also had a short broadsword on his side with a round shield slung on his back. Their beards were forked and plaited and thrust into their belts. Their caps were of iron, and they were shod with iron, and their faces were grim. Trumpets called men and elves to arms. Before long, the dwarves could be seen coming up the valley at great pace. They halted between the river and the eastern spur, but few held on their way, and crossing the river drew near the camp. There they laid down their weapons and held out their hands in sign of peace. Bard went out to meet them, and with him went Bilbo. Yay! You're welcome. I'm glad you like it. You're awesome, Mark, and I really appreciate you being here. No worries at all. Trumpets called men. Okay, right. We are sent from Dane, son of Nain, they said when questioned. We are hastening to our kinsmen in the mountain, since we learn that the kingdom of old is renewed. But who are you that sit on this plain as foes before defended walls? This, of course, in polite and rather old-fashioned language of such occasions, meant simply, you have no business to be here. We are going on, and so make way or we shall fight you. This was meant to push on, but they meant to push on between the mountain and the loop of the river, for the narrow land there did not seem to be strongly guarded. Bard, of course, refused to allow the dwarves to go straight to the mountain. He was determined to wait until the gold and silver had been brought out in exchange for the Arkenstone, for he did not believe that this would be done. If once the fortress was manned with so large and warlike a company, they had brought with them a great store of supplies, then dwarves can carry very heavy burdens. Nearly all of Dane's folk, in spite of their rapid march, bore huge packs on their backs in addition to their weapons. They would stand a siege for weeks, and by that time, yet more dwarves might come, and yet more, for Thorin had many relatives, and they would be able to reopen and guard some of the gate, so that the besiegers would have to encircle the whole mountain. And for that, they had not sufficient numbers. These were, in fact, precisely their plans, for the Raven messengers had been busy between Thorin and Dane, but for the moment the way was barred, and so after angry words, the dwarf messengers retired, muttering into their beards. Bard then sent messengers at once to the gate, but they found no gold payment. Arrows came forth as soon as they were within shot, and they hastened back in dismay. In the camp, all was now astir, as if for battle, for the dwarves of Dane were advancing along the eastern bank. Fools, laughed Bard, to come thus beneath the mountain's arm. They do not understand war above ground, whatever they may know of battle in the mines. There are many of our archers and spearmen now hidden in the rocks upon their right flank. Dwarf mail may be good, but they will soon be hard put to it. Let us sit on them now from both sides before they are long rested. But the Elfin King said, Long will I tarry ere I begin a war for gold. Dwarves cannot pass us unless we will, or do anything that we cannot mark. Let us hope still for something that will bring reconciliation. Our advantage in numbers will be enough, if in the end it must come to unhappy blows. But he reckoned without the dwarves. The knowledge that the Arkenstone was in the hands of the besiegers burned in their thoughts. Also, they guessed the hesitation of Bard and his friends, and resolved to strike while they debated. Suddenly, without a signal, they sprang silently forward in attack. Bows twanged and arrows whistled. Battle was about to be joined. Still more suddenly, a darkness came on with a dreadful swiftness. A black cloud hurrying over the sky. Winter thunder and a wild wind rolled roaring up and rumbled in the mountain and lighting its peak. And beneath the thunder, another blackness could be seen whirling forward, but did not come with the wind. It came from the north, like a vast cloud of birds so dense that no light could be seen between their wings. Halt! Cried Gandalf, who had appeared suddenly, and stood alone, with arms uplifted between the advancing dwarves and the ranks awaiting them. Halt! He called in a voice like thunder, and his staff blazed forth a flash like lightning. Dread has come upon you all. Alas, it has come more swiftly than I guessed. The goblins are upon you. Blog of the North is coming. O Dane, those whose father you slew in Moria. Behold, the bats above his army like a sea of locusts. They ride upon wolves, and wargs are in their train. Amazement and confusion fell upon them all. Even as Gandalf had been speaking, the darkness grew. The dwarves halted and gazed at the sky. The elves cried with many voices. Come, called Gandalf. There is yet time for us for counsel. Let Dane, son of Nain, come swiftly to us. So began a battle that none had expected, and it was called the Battle of the Five Armies, and it was very terrible. Upon one side were the goblins and the wild wolves. Upon the other were the elves and the men and the dwarves. This is how it fell out. Ever since the fall of the great goblin of the Misty Mountains, the hatred of their race for the dwarves had been rekindled to fury. Messengers had been passed to and fro between all their cities, colonies, and strongholds, for they resolved now to win the domination of the north. Tidings they had gathered in secret ways, and in all the mountains there was a foraging and an arming. Then they marched and gathered by hill and valley, going over by tunnel or under dark, until around beneath the great mountain Gundabrad in the north, which was their capital, a vast host was assembled, ready to sweep down in time of storm, unawares upon the south. Then they learned of the death of Smaug, and joy was in their hearts. And they hastened night after night through the mountains and came thus at last, in a sudden from the north, hard on the heels of Dane. Not even the ravens knew of their coming until they came out into the broken lands which divided the lonely mountain from the hills behind. How much Gandalf knew cannot be said, but it is plain that he had not expected this sudden assault. This is the plan that he made in council with the Elven King, with Bard, with Dane, for the Dwarf Lord now joined them. The goblins were foes of all, and at their coming all other quarrels were forgotten. Their only hope was to lure the goblin into the valley between the arms of the mountain, and themselves to man the great spurs that stuck south and east. Yet this would be perilous if the goblins were in sufficient numbers to overrun the mountain itself, and so attack them also from behind and above. But there was no time to make any other plan or to summon any help. Soon the thunder passed, rolling away to the southeast, but the bat cloud came flying lower over the shoulder of the mountain and whirled above them, shutting out the light and filling them with dread. "To the mountain!" cried Bard. "To the mountain! Let us take our places while there is yet time!" On the southern spur and its lowest slopes, and on the rocks at its feet, the elves were set. On the eastern spur were men and dwarves. But Bard and some of the nimblest men and elves climbed to the height of the eastern shoulder to gain a view to the north. Soon they could see that the land before the mountain's feet were black with a hurrying multitude. Ere long, the vanguard swirled around the spur's end and came rushing into Dale. These were the swiftest wolf riders, and already their cries and howls rent the air from afar. A few brave men were strung before them to make a feint at resistance, and many there fell before the rest drew back and fled to either side. As Gandalf had hoped, the goblin army had gathered behind the resisted vanguard, and pouring now in rage into the valley, driving wildly up between the arms of the mountains, seeking the foe. Their banners were countless, black and red. They came on like a tide in fury and disorder. It was a terrible battle, the most dreadful of all of Bilbo's experiences, and the one which at the time he hated most, which is to say, it was the one he was most proud of, most fond of recalling long afterwards, although he was quite unimportant in it. Actually, I might say that he put his ring on early in the business and vanished from sight, if not all danger. A magic ring of that sort is not a complete protection from a goblin charge, nor does it stop flying arrows and wild spears, but does help in getting out of the way and prevents your head from being specifically chosen for a sweeping stroke by a goblin swordsman. The elves were the first to charge. Their hatred for the goblins is cold and bitter. Their spears and swords shone in the gloom with a gleam of chill flame, so deadly the wrath of the hands that held them. As soon as the host of the enemies was dense in the valley, they sent against it a shower of arrows, and each flicked as if it had fled with life of stinging fire. Behind the arrows, 1,000 of their spearmen leapt down and charged. The yells were deafening. The rocks were stained black with goblin blood. Just as the goblins were recovering from the onslaught of the elf charge, and the elf charge was halted, there arose from across the valley a deep-throated roar, with cries of "Moria!" and "Dane! Dane!" The dwarves of the Iron Hills plunged in, wielding their mattocks upon either side, and besides them came the men of the lake with long swords. Panic came upon the goblins, and even as they turned to meet this new attack, the elves charged again with renewed numbers. Already many of the goblins were flying back down the river to escape from the trap, and many of their own wolves were turning on them, rending the dead and the wounded. Victory seemed at hand when a cry rang out on the heights above. Goblins had scaled the mountains from the other side, and many more were on the slopes above the gate, and others were streaming down recklessly, heedless of those that fell screaming from the cliffs and precipice to attack the spurs from above. Each of these could be reached by paths that ran down the main mass of the mountain in the center, and the defenders had too few to bar the way for long. Victory now vanished from hope. They had only stemmed the first onslaught of the black tide. Day drew on. The goblins gathered again in the valley. There was a host of wargs came ravaging, and with them the bodyguard of Blog, goblins of huge size with scimitars of steel. Soon actual darkness was coming into a stormy sky, while still the great bats swirled above their heads and ears of elves and men, or fastened vampire-like on the stricken. Now Bard was fighting to defend the eastern spur, and yet giving slowly back, and the elf lords were at bay about their king upon the southern arm, near the watchpost on the Raven Hill. Suddenly there was a great shout, and from the gate came a trumpet call. They had forgotten Thorin. Part of the wall, moved by levers, fell outwards with a crash into the pool. Out leapt the king under the mountain, and his companions followed him. Hood and cloak were gone. They were in shining armor, and red light leapt from their eyes, in the gloom of the great dwarf fleeting like gold in a dying fire. Rocks were hurled down from on high by the goblins above, but they held on and leapt down the fall's foot and rushed towards the battle. Wolves and rider fell or fled before them. Thorin wielded his axe with mighty strokes, and nothing seemed to harm him. To me, elves and men, to me, O my kinsfolk, he cried, and his voice shook like a horn in the valley. Down, heedless of order, rushed all the dwarves of Dane to help. Down, too, came many of the lakemen, for Bard could not restrain them. And out upon the other side came many of the spearmen of the elves. Once again the goblins were stricken in the valley, and they were piled in heaps till Dale was dark and hideous with their corpses. The wargs were scattered, and Thorin drove right against the bodyguard of Blog. But he could not pierce the ranks. Already behind him among the goblin dead lay many men and many dwarves, and many fair elves that should have lived yet long years merrily in the wood. And as the valley widened, his onset grew ever slower. His numbers were too few. His flanks were unguarded. Soon the attackers were attacked, and they were forced into a great ring, facing away and hemmed about with goblins and wolves, returning the assault. The bodyguard of Blog came howling against them and drove in upon their ranks like waves upon cliffs of sand. Their friends could not help them, for the assault from the mountain was renewed with redoubled force, and upon either side men and elves were being slowly beaten down. On all this, Bilbo looked with misery. He had taken his stand on Ravenhill among the elves, partly because there was more of a chance of escape from that point, and partly, with the more tookish part of his mind, because he was going to be in the last desperate stand. He preferred, on the whole, to defend the Elf King. Gandalf, too, I might say, was there, sitting on the ground, as if in deep thought, preparing, I suppose, some last blast of magic before the end. That did not seem far off. It will not be too long now, thought Bilbo, before the goblins win the gate and we're all slaughtered or driven and captured. Really, it is enough to make one weep after all one has gone through. I'd rather old Smaug had been left with all the wretched treasure than these vile creatures should get it. Poor old Bombor and Balin and Fili and Kili and the rest of them came to a bad end. Bard, too, and the Lakemen. And there are many elves. Ah, misery me. I have heard songs of many battles, and I have always understood that defeat may be glorious. It seems very uncomfortable, not to say distressing. I wish I was well out of it. The clouds were torn by wind, and a red sunset slashed the west. Seeing the sudden gleam in the gloom, Bilbo looked around. He gave a great cry, for he had seen a sight that made his heart leap. Dark shapes, small yet majestic against the distant glow. The eagles, he shouted. The eagles, he shouted. The eagles are coming. Bilbo's eyes were seldom wrong. The eagles were coming down the wind, line after line, in such a host that must never have been gathered in all the eyries of the north. The eagles, Bilbo cried, dancing and waving his arms. The elves could not see him. They could hear him, and they too took up the cry, and it echoed across the valley. Many wondering eyes looked up. Well, as yet nothing could be seen except the southern shoulders of the mountains. The eagles, cried Bilbo once more, but at that moment a stone hurtling from above smote heavily on his helm, and he fell with a crash and knew no more. Chapter 18. The Return Journey. When Bilbo came to himself, he was literally by himself. He was lying on the flat stones of Raven Hill, and no one was near. A cloudless day, but cold, was broad above him. He was shaking, as chilled as stone, but his head burned with fire. I wonder what has happened, he said to himself. At any rate, I'm not yet one of the fallen heroes, but I suppose there still is time enough for that. He sat up painfully. Looking into the valley, he could see no living goblins. After a while, his head cleared a little, and he thought he could see elves moving in the rocks below. He rubbed his eyes. Surely there was a camp in the plain some distance off, and there was coming and going about the gate. Dwarves seemed busy removing the wall, but all was deadly still. There was no call, no echo of song. Sorrow seemed to be in the air. Victory after all, I suppose, he said, feeling his head aching. Oh, it seems to be a very gloomy business. Suddenly he was aware of a man climbing up and coming towards him. Hello there, he called with a shaky voice. Hello there, what news? What voice is that speaks among the stones? Said the man, halting and peering about him not far from Bilbo, where Bilbo sat. Then Bilbo remembered his ring. Oh, I'm blessed, said he. The invisibility has its drawbacks after all. Otherwise, I suppose I might have spent a warm and comfortable night in bed. It's me, Bilbo Baggins, companion of Thorin, he cried, hurriedly taking off the ring. It is well that I have found you, said the man, striding forward. You are needed, and we have been looking for you long. You would have been numbered among the dead, who are many, if Gandalf the wizard had not said that your voice was last heard in this place. I have been sent to look here for the last time. Are you much hurt? Nasty knock to the head, I think, said Bilbo. But I have a helm and a hard skull. All the same, I feel sick and my legs are like straw. I will carry you down to the camp in the valley, said the man, and picked him up lightly up. The man was swift and sure-footed. It was not long before Bilbo was set down before a tent in Dale, and there stood Gandalf with his arm in a sling. Even the wizard had not escaped without a wound, and there were few unharmed in all the host. When Gandalf saw Bilbo, he was delighted. Baggins, he exclaimed. Well, I never, alive after all. I am glad. I was beginning to wonder if even your luck would see you through. A terrible business. It was nearly disastrous, but other news can wait. Come, he said more gravely. You are called for. And leading the hobbit, he took him within the tent. Hail, Thorin, he said as he entered. I have brought him. There indeed lay Thorin Oakenshield, wounded with many wounds, and his rent armor and notched axe were cast upon the floor. He looked up at Bilbo as Bilbo came before him. Farewell, good thief, he said. I go now to the halls of waiting to sit beside my fathers until the world is renewed. Since I leave now all the gold and silver and go where it is of little worth, I wish to part in friendship from you. I would take back my words and deeds at the gate. Bilbo knelt on one knee and was filled with sorrow. Farewell, King under the mountain, said he. This is a bitter adventure if it must end so, and not a mountain of gold can amend it. Yet I am glad that I have shared your perils. That has been more than any Baggins deserves. No, said Thorin. There is more in you of good than you know, kind child of the kindly West. Some courage and some wisdom blended in measure. If more of us valued food and cheer and song above hoarded gold, it would be a merrier world. But sad or merry, I must leave it now. Farewell. And Bilbo turned away. He went by himself and sat alone wrapped in a blanket. Whether you believe it or not, he wept until his eyes were red. His voice was hoarse. He was a kindly little soul. Indeed, it was long before he had the heart to make a joke again. A mercy it is, he said at last to himself, that I woke up when I did. I wish Thorin were living, but I am glad that we parted in kindness. You are a fool, Bilbo Baggins, and you made a great mess of that business with the stone. There was a battle, in spite of all your efforts to buy peace and quiet. But I suppose you can hardly be blamed for that. All that had happened after he was stunned, Bilbo learned later, but it gave him more sorrow than joy, and he was now weary of his adventure. He was aching in his bones for the homeward journey. That, however, was a little delayed. So, in the meantime, I will tell you something of the events. The eagles had long had suspicion of the goblins mustering from their watchfulness. The movements in the mountains could not be altogether hid. So they too had gathered in great numbers under the great eagle of the Misty Mountains, and at length, smelling battle from afar, they had come speeding down the gale in the nick of time. They it was who dislodged the goblins from the mountain slopes, casting them over the precipices or diving on them, or driving them shrieking and bewildered amongst their foes. It was not long before they had freed the lonely mountain, and the elves and men on either side of the valley could come at last to the help of the battle below. But even with the eagles, they were outnumbered, and at the last hour, Bjorn himself had appeared. No one knew how or from where. He came alone and in bare shape, and he seemed to have grown almost giant size in his wrath. The roar of his voice was like drums and guns, and he tossed wolves and goblins from his path like straws and feathers. He fell upon the rear and broke like a clap of thunder through the ring. The dwarves were making a stand still about their lord upon a low rounded hill. Then Bjorn stooped and lifted Thorin, who had fallen pierced with spears, and bore him out of the fray. Swiftly he returned, and his wrath was redoubled, so nothing could withstand him, and no weapon seemed to bite upon him. He scattered the bodyguard and pulled down Blorg himself and crushed him. Then dismay fell on the goblins, and they fled in all directions. But weariness left their enemies with the coming of new hope, and they pursued them closely, prevented most of them from escaping where they could. They drove many of them into the river running. Such as fled south or west, they hunted in the marshes of the forest river, and there the greater part of the fugitives perished. While those that came hardly to the wood elves' realms were there slain or drawn to die deep in the tactless dark of Mirkwood. Songs have said that 3 parts of the goblin warriors of the north perished on that day, and the mountains had peace for many a year. Victory had been assured before the fall of the night, but the pursuit was still afoot when Bilbo returned to camp, and not many were in the valley, save for the more grievously wounded. "Where are the eagles?" he asked Gandalf that evening as he lay wrapped in many warm blankets. "Some are in the hunt," said the wizard, "but most have gone back to their eyries. They would not stay here, and departed with the first light of morning. Dane was crowned their chief with gold and sworn friendship with them forever." I'm sorry. I mean, I should have liked to see them again," said Bilbo sleepily. "Perhaps I shall see them on my way home. I suppose I shall be going home soon." "As soon as you like," said the wizard. Actually, it was some days before Bilbo really set out. They buried Thorin deep beneath the mountain, and Bard laid the Arkenstone upon his breast. "There let it lie until the mountain falls," he said. "May it bring good fortune to all his folks that dwell hereafter." Upon his tomb, the Elfin King then laid Orcrist, the elvish sword that had been taken from Thorin in captivity. It is said in songs that it gleamed ever in the dark if foes approached, and the fortress of the dwarves could not be taken by surprise. There now Dane, son of Nain, took up his abode, and he became the king under the mountain, and in time many other dwarves gathered to his throne in the ancient halls. Of the 12 companions of Thorin, 10 remained. Fili and Kili had fallen defending him with shield and body, for he was their mother's eldest brother. The others remained with Dane, for Dane dealt his treasure well. There was, of course, no longer any question of dividing the hoard in such shares as had been planned. To Balin and Dwalin and Dori and Nori and Ori and Oin and Gloin and Bifur and Bofur and Bombor, or to Bilbo. Yet a 14th share of all the silver and gold, wrought and unwrought, was given up to Bard. For Dane said, "We will honor the agreement of the dead, as he has now the Arkenstone in his keeping." Even a 14th share was wealth exceedingly greater than many of the mortal kings. From that treasure, Bard sent much of the gold to the master of the lake town, and he rewarded his followers and friends freely. To the elf king he gave the emeralds of Girion, such jewels as he most loved, which Dane restored to him. To Bilbo he said, "This treasure is as much yours as it is mine. The old agreements cannot stand, since so many have claim on its winning and defense. Yet even though you are willing to lay aside your claim, I should wish that the words of Thorin, for which he repented, should not prove true, that we should give you little. I would reward you most richly of all." Very kind of you, said Bilbo. But really, it is a relief to me. How on earth should I have gotten all that treasure home without war and murder all along the way? I don't know. And I don't know what I should have done with it when I got home. I'm sure it is better in your hands. In the end, he would only take 2 small chests, one filled with silver, the other with gold, such as one strong pony could carry. That will be quite as much as I can manage, said he. At last, the time came for him to say goodbye to his friends. Farewell, Balin, said he, and farewell, Dwalin, and farewell, Dori, Nori, Ori, Oin, Gloin, Bifor, Bofor, and Bombor. May your beards never grow thin. And turning towards the mountain, he added, farewell, Thorin Oakenshield, and Fili and Kili, may your memory never fade. Then the dwarves bowed low before their gate, but words stuck in their throats. Goodbye and good luck wherever you fare, said Balin at last. If ever you visit us again, when our halls are made fair once more, then the feast shall indeed be splendid. If ever you are passing my way, said Bilbo, don't wait to knock. Tea is at 4, but any of you will be welcome at any time. And he turned away. The elf host was on the march, and if it was now sadly lessened, yet many were glad, for now the northern world would be merrier for many a long day. The dragon was dead, and the goblins overthrown, and their hearts looked forward after winter to the joy of spring. Gandalf and Bilbo rode behind the Elven King, and beside them strode Bjorn once again in man shape, and he laughed and sang in a loud voice upon the road. So they went until they drew near the borders of Mirkwood to the north of the place where the forest river ran out. Then they halted, for the wizard and Bilbo would not enter the wood, even though the king bade them stay a while at his forest halls. They intended to go along the edge of the forest, round its northern end, in the waste that lay between it and the beginning of the Grey Mountains. It was a long and cheerless road, but now that the goblins were crushed, it seemed safer to them than the dreadful passageway under the trees. Moreover, Bjorn was going that way too. Farewell, O Elven King, said Gandalf. Merry be the greenwood while the world is yet young, and merry be your folk. Farewell, O Gandalf, said the king. May you ever appear where you are most needed and least expected. The oftener you appear in my halls, the better I shall be pleased. I beg of you, said Bilbo, stammering and standing on one foot, to accept this gift. And he brought out a necklace of silver and pearls that Dane had given him at their parting. In what way have I earned a gift, O hobbit, said the king. Well, don't you know, said Bilbo, rather confused, that some little return should be made for your hospitality? I mean, even a burglar has feelings. I have drunk much of your wine and eaten much of your bread. I will take your gift, O Bilbo the Magnificent, said the king gravely, and I name you elf friend and blessed. May your shadow never grow less, or stealing would be too easy. Farewell. And then the elves turned towards the forest, and Bilbo started his long road home. He had many hardships and adventures before he got back. The wild was still the wild, and there were many other things in those days besides goblins, but he was well guided and well guarded. The wizard was with him and Bjorn for much of the way, and he was never in great danger again. Anyway, by midwinter, Gandalf and Bilbo had come all the way back along both edges of the forest to the doors of Bjorn's house, and there for a while they stayed. Yuletide was warm and merry there, and men came from far and wide to feast at Bjorn's bidding. The goblins of the Misty Mountains were now few and terrified, and hidden in the deepest holes they could find, and the wargs had vanished from the woods, so that men went abroad without fear. Bjorn indeed became a great chief afterwards in those regions, and ruled a wide land between the mountains and the wood. It is said that for many generations the men of his line had the power of taking the bear's shape, and some were grim men and bad, but most were at heart like Bjorn, if less in size and strength. In their day the last goblin was hunted from the Misty Mountains, and a new peace came over the edge of the wild. It was spring, and a fair one, with mild weathers and a bright sun, before Bilbo and Gandalf took their leave at last of Bjorn, and though he longed for home, Bilbo left with regret, for the flowers of the garden of Bjorn were in springtime no less marvelous than in high summer. At last, they came upon the long road and reached the very pass where the goblins had captured them. But they came to the high point at the morning and looked backwards. They saw a white sun shining over the outstretched lands. There behind lay Mirkwood, blue and in the distance, and darkly green at the nearer edge, even in the spring. There, far away, was the lonely mountain on the edge of eyesight. On its high peak, snow, yet unmelted, was gleaming and pale. So comes snow after fire, and even dragons have their ending, said Bilbo, and he turned his back on his adventure. The Tookish part was growing very tired, and the Baggins was daily getting stronger. I wish now only to be in my own armchair, he said. Chapter 19, The Last Stage. It was on May the 1st that the two came back at last to the brink of the Valley of Rivendell, where stood the last, or first, homely house. Again, it was evening. Their ponies were tired, especially the one that carried the baggage, and they all felt in need of rest. As they rode down the steep path, Bilbo heard the elves still singing in the trees as if they had not stopped since he left, and as soon as the riders came down into the lower glades of the wood, they burst into song much the same kind as before. This is something like it. The dragon is withered, his bones are now crumbled, his armor is shivered, his splendors humbled. Those swords shall be rusted, and throne and crown perish, with strength that men trusted and wealth that they cherish. Here grass is yet growing, and leaves are yet swinging, the white water flowing, the elves are singing, come tra-la-la-lally, come back to the valley. The stars are far brighter than gems without measure. The moon is far whiter than silver and treasure. The fire more shining than on hearth than the gloaming than in the gloaming than gold won by mining. So why go a roaming? Oh, tra-la-la, come back to the valley. Oh, where are you going so late in returning? The river is flowing, the stars are all burning. Oh, whither so laden, so sad and so dreary? Here elf and elf maiden now welcome the weary with tra-la-la-la, come back to the valley, tra-la-la-la-fa-la. And the elves came out and greeted them and led them across the water to the house of Elrond. There was warm welcome that was made of them, and there were many eager ears that evening to hear the tale of their adventures. Gandalf it was who spoke, for Bilbo was fallen quiet and drowsy. Most of the tale he knew, for he had been in it and had himself told much of it to the wizard on their homeward way, or in the house of Bjorn. But every now and again he would open one eye and listen when a part of the story which he did not yet know came in. It was in this way he learned where Gandalf had been to, for he overheard the words of the wizard to Elrond. It appeared Gandalf had been to a great council of the White Wizards, masters of lore and good magic, and that they had at last driven the necromancer from his dark hold in the south of Mirkwood. Ere long now, said Gandalf was saying, the forest will grow somewhat more wholesome. The north will be freed of that horror for many long years, I hope. Yet I wish he were banished from the world. It would be well indeed, said Elrond, but I fear that will not come about in this age of the world, or for many after. When the tale of their journeyings was told, there were other tales, and yet more tales, tales of long ago, and tales of new things, and tales of no time at all, till Bilbo's head fell forward on his chest, and he snored comfortably in the corner. He woke to find himself in a white bed, and the moon was shining through the window. Below, many elves were singing loud and clear on the banks of the stream. Sing all ye joyful, now sing all together, the winds in the treetop, the winds in the heather. The stars are in blossom, the moon is in flower, and bright are the windows of night in her bower. Dance all ye joyful, now dance all together, soft is the grass, and let foot be like feather. The river is silver, the shadows are fleeting. Merry is Maytime, and merry our meeting. Sing we now softly in dreams, let us weave him, wind him in slumber, and there let us leave him. The wanderer sleepeth, now soft be his pillow. Lullaby, lullaby, alder and willow. Sigh no more pine till the wind of the morn, fall moon dark beyond the land. Hush, hush, oak, ash and thorn, hushed be all water till dawn is at hand. Well, merry people, said Bilbo, looking out. What time by the moon is this? Your lullaby would waken a drunken goblin, yet I thank you. and your snores would waken a stone dragon. Yet we thank you, they answered with laughter. It is drawing towards dawn, and you have slept now since the night's beginning. Tomorrow, perhaps, you will be cured of weariness. A little sleep does a great cure in the house of Elrond, said he, but I will take all the cure I can get. A second night, fair friends. And with that, he went back to bed and slept till late in the morning. Weariness fell from him soon in that house, and he had many merry jests and dances early and late with the elves of the valley. Yet even that place he could not long delay him now, and he thought always of his own home. After a week, therefore, he said farewell to Elrond, and giving him such small gifts as he would accept, he rode away with Gandalf. Even as they left the valley, the sky darkened in the west before them, and the wind and rain came up to meet them. Merry is the Maytime, said Bilbo as the rain beat upon his face. But our back is to legends, and we are coming home. I suppose this is the first taste of it. There is a long road yet, said Gandalf. But it is the last road, said Bilbo. They came to the river that marked the very edge of the borderlands of the wild, and to the ford beneath the steep bank, which you may remember. The water was swollen both with the melting of the snows and the approach of summer, and with the day-long rain, but they crossed with some difficulty and pressed forward as evening fell on the last stage of their journey. This was much as it had been before, except that the company was smaller and more silent. Also, this time there were no trolls. At each point on the road, Bilbo recalled the happenings in the words of a year ago. It seemed to him more like 10, so that, of course, he quickly noted the place where the pony had fallen in the river, and they had turned aside for their nasty adventure with Tom, Bert, and Bill. Not far from the road, they found the gold of the trolls, which they had buried and hidden untouched. I have enough to last my time, said Bilbo when he dug it up. You had better take this, Gandalf. I dare say you can find a use for it. Indeed I can, said the wizard. But share and share alike. You may find you have more needs than you expect. So they put the gold in the bags and slung them on the ponies, who were not pleased at all about it. And after that, their going was slower. For the most of the time they walked. But the land was green, and there was much grass, through which the hobbit strolled contentedly. He mopped his face with a red handkerchief. No, not a single one of his own had survived. He had borrowed this from Elrond. For now June had brought summer, and the weather was bright and hot again. As all things come to an end, even this story, a day came at last when they were in sight of the country where Bilbo had been born and bred, where the shapes of the land and of the trees were well known to him, and his hands and toes. Coming to the rise, he could see his own hill in the distance, and he suddenly stopped and said, Roads go ever on, over rock and under tree, by caves where never sun has shone, by streams that never find the sea, over snow by winter sown, and through the merry flowers of June, over grass and over stone, and under mountains in the moon. Roads go ever on, under cloud and under star, yet feet that wander have gone, turn at last to home afar. Eyes that fire and sword have seen, and horror in the halls of stone, look at last on meadows green, and trees and hills they long have known. Gandalf looked at him. My dear Bilbo, said he, something is the matter with you. You are not the hobbit you were. And so they crossed the bridge, and passed the mill by the river, and came right back to Bilbo's own door. Bless me, what's going on? He cried. There was a great commotion, and people of all sorts, respectable and unrespectable, were thick round the door, and many were going in and out, not even wiping their feet on the mat, and Bilbo noticed with annoyance. If he was surprised, they were more surprised still. He had arrived back in the middle of an auction. There was a large notice in black and red that hung on the gate, stating that on June the 22nd, Messrs. Grubb, and Berzos would sell by auction the effects of the late Bilbo Baggins, Esquire of Bag Hill, Underhill, Hobbiton, still to commence at 10 o'clock sharp. It was now nearly lunchtime, and most of the things had been sold for various pieces, from next to nothing to old songs, as is not unusual in auctions. Bilbo's cousins, the Sackville Bagginses, were, in fact, busy measuring his rooms to see if their own furniture would fit. In short, Bilbo was presumed dead, and not everybody that said so was sorry to find him presumed wrong. The return of Mr. Bilbo Baggins created quite a disturbance both under the hill and over the hill and across the water. It was a great deal more than 9 days of wonder. The legal bother, indeed, lasted many years, and it was quite a long time before Mr. Baggins was, in fact, admitted to be alive again. The people who had got specifically good bargains at the sale took a deal of convincing, and in the end, to save some time, Bilbo had to buy back quite a lot of his own furniture. Many of his silver spoons mysteriously disappeared and were never accounted for. Personally, he suspected the Saxville Bagginses. On their side, they never admitted that the returned Baggins was genuine, and they were not on friendly terms with Bilbo ever after. They really wanted to live in his nice hobbit hole so very much. Indeed, Bilbo found he had lost more than his spoons. He had lost his reputation. It is true that he remained an elf friend and had the honor of dwarves, wizards, and all such folk as ever passed that way, but he was no longer quite respectable. He was, in fact, held by all the hobbits in the neighborhood to be queer, except by his nephews and nieces on the Took side, but even they were not encouraged in their friendship by their elders. I am sorry to say that he did not mind. He was quite content, and the sound of the kettle at his hearth was ever more musical than it had been in the quiet days before the unexpected party. His sword hung over the mantelpiece. His coat of mail was arranged on a stand in the hall until he lent it to a museum. His gold and silver was largely spent in presents, both useful and extravagant, which to a certain extent accounts for his affection of his nephews and nieces. His magic ring he kept a great secret, for he chiefly used it when unpleasant callers came. He took to writing poetry and visiting the elves, and though many shook their heads and touched their foreheads and said, "Poor old Baggins," and though few believed any of his tales, he remained very happy until the end of his days, and those were extraordinarily long. One autumn evening, some years forwards, Bilbo was sitting in his study writing his memoirs. He thought of calling them There and Back Again, A Hobbit's Holiday, when there was a ring at the door. It was Gandalf and a dwarf, and the dwarf was actually Balin. Come in," said Bilbo, and soon they were settled in chairs by the fire. If Balin noticed that Mr. Baggins' waistcoat was more extensive and had real gold buttons, Bilbo noticed that Balin's beard was several inches longer, and his jeweled belt was of great magnificence. They fell to talking of their times together, of course, and Bilbo asked how things were going in the lands of the mountain. It seemed they were going very well. Bard had rebuilt the town of Dale, and men had gathered to him from the lake in the south and the west, and all the valley had become tilled again and rich, and the desolation was now filled with birds and blossoms in spring, and fruit and feasting in the autumn, and Lake Town was refounded and was much more prosperous than ever, and much wealth was sent up and down the river running, and there was friendship in those parts between the elves and dwarves and men. The old master had come to a bad end. Bard hadn't given him much gold for the help of the lake people, but being of the kind that easily catches such disease, he fell into the dragon sickness and took most of the gold and fled with it and died of starvation in the waste, deserted by his companions. The new master is of a wiser kind, said Balin, and very popular, for of course he gets most of his credit for the present prosperity. They're making songs which say that in his days the rivers run with gold. And the prophecies of the old songs have turned out to be true after a fashion, said Bilbo. Of course, said Gandalf. Why should they not prove true? Surely you don't disbelieve the prophecies because you've had a hand in bringing them about yourself. You don't really suppose, do you, that all your adventures and escapades were managed by mere luck just for your sole benefit? You are a very fine person, Mr. Baggins, and I am very fond of you, but you're only quite a little fellow in the wide world after all. Thank goodness, said Bilbo, laughing, and handed him the tobacco jar. And that's it. That is the end of The Hobbit. And there is a dog downstairs that is squeaking and squealing, so if you will give me a moment, I am going to go let him upstairs. I will be right back. I told him if he behaves himself, he's allowed in here. So we'll see how long this lasts. Yeah. Yeah. He's upset because he had been kicked out of the room and locked downstairs. Since he destroyed my... I don't know if you were here for this, but he chewed my... what's it called? Network cable in half. It's true. So now we have an opening for our next book. We can do... I mean, if... you know, we don't really have an end time, so we sure could do the entire Lord of the Rings if you would like. Excuse you, Potato. What do you want? What do you want? Yes, I see you pulling on my leg. What do you want? Yeah? What do you want, buddy? Silly dog. Potato, you know you can go outside on your own, right? Anyway. Yeah, so we will have to figure out what our next large project book is. I like the idea of continuing to do like one project book, one larger book, and then some stuff on the side. You know, like short stories and that kind of thing. So, we can do Lord of the Rings. We can do Beowulf. You want something more of a the origin of The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, because Tolkien, of course, was I think he was a linguist, but he studied a lot of the ancient languages and myths of or a lot of Scandinavian myths and stuff. Okay, yeah, I mean, we can do Lord of the Rings. That is a project, so I have no problem doing that. Potato. Yeah, we can. We'll tentatively can look at starting Lord of the Rings. Trying to think what else we could do. Yeah, but see, Lord of the Rings gets like that too, especially towards the end. Yeah, I haven't seen the movie. I heard it was okay. The book is interesting. Of course, it's in translation. We could also do... You know what? I had wanted to reinvigorate my little Discord anyway. Does that Discord link still work? The one that... Hey, Potato, stop that. This dog is pulling stuff off the shelves. Anyway, so what I think I'll do is this will be a good time to revitalize the Potato, what are you doing? Hey, stop that. I'm gonna kick you out again. You wanna get kicked out of the room? This dog is just pulling stuff off of everywhere he can. Buddy. So yeah, I kind of, because I built this like server and then never used it. So what I would like to do, I think, yeah, dog wants attention very much now. I will take you in a minute. Yeah, so this would be a chance to kind of revitalize the server. We can do a what's it called? Like a survey on the server, and we could give it a couple days to, you know, so people can go. It's an excuse to get people to go onto the server and pay attention over there. And yeah, we'll do that. And Lord of the Rings will certainly be on there. And maybe I'll put a couple other ideas and you guys can let me know. And we could also intersperse between two of them or do something like that too, if you want to. So there are plenty of different ways to give your puppy attention. Yeah, there are plenty of ways to set all this. So please, if you get the chance, try to see if my Discord server works, or if that link still works to it. The server's still up. Let me know if you have problems with it. I'm gonna put up later on today, after I deal with the dog that's still trying to chew on wires. Come on, stop it. Oi. Buddy? Stop. You cut too. Stop it. Hey, stop it. Do not chew the wires. Stop it. Okay, he managed to Potato, stop. Ow. Buddy, what do you want? You need to go outside? Okay. I'm gonna stop this here because Potato is going nuts. But yeah, we'll figure out the Discord thing. I think I'll put up a survey there on the next thing to do. Lord of the Rings will certainly be in there. Like I said, we can try and intersperse two different books or do something like that. More to come. Unfortunately, I'm not going to raid anyone right now unless Buelty's on. Let me see. If Buelty's on, I'll raid him. Nah, I don't really. Yeah. Yeah, just kind of in the interest of dealing with dog, I think we're just gonna end this stream. I might stream later on playing some games or not. I'm not sure. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. In the meantime, I hope everyone has a wonderful evening. Thank you so much for joining me for our read through of The Hobbit. I hope you guys at least somewhat enjoyed some of it. I'm still working at getting better at reading aloud, so this is my practice. At any rate, have a wonderful evening. I will catch you guys on Friday for some mathy math time.